The scratching started at midnight. 3 deliberate drags against frozen wood that made my breath stop cold in my chest. I sat alone in the dark, empty whiskey bottle on the floor, fire dying to embers. 3 years to the day since Sarah died. 3 years of just existing. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Not wind, not branches. Something alive, something purposeful. My hand found the doorknob, every survival instinct screaming at me to stay inside. Outside, -35 degrees. Inside, the hollow shell of a man who'd stopped living the day his wife crashed her car into a tree. I opened the door anyway. Golden eyes stared back through the darkness. Keeper, Sarah's wolf, blood on his muzzle, not his own. He looked at me, then northeast toward the mountains. Back to me, northeast again. Someone was dying out there, and somehow I knew opening this door would change everything. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. I'm Nathan Cole, 35 years old, sheriff of Blackthorn Ridge, Wyoming, and a widower who'd forgotten how to be anything else. For 3 years, I'd been going through the motions, waking up, making 2 cups of coffee out of habit, watching the second one go cold while I stared at nothing. Sarah died on a night like this. Blizzard, ice, a car that went off Route 287 too fast. They said it was an accident. I blamed myself for letting her go alone. I blamed the weather. And God help me, I blamed the wolf she'd been trying to release back into the wild. My salary as sheriff was $52,000 a year. Sounds decent until you subtract the $43,000 in medical debt from Sarah's final weeks. Bills the insurance wouldn't cover, treatments that didn't work. I was drowning financially, emotionally, in every way that mattered. But I kept showing up to work, kept paying what I could, kept breathing because my daughter needed me to. Abby, 8 years old, and she hadn't spoken a word in 3 years, not since she watched her mother's car burst into flames from our living room window. We'd been standing together, waiting for Sarah to come home. Instead, we saw the orange glow on the horizon, heard the sirens. Abby opened her mouth to scream and nothing came out. Nothing's come out since. The therapist called it selective mutism. $200 a month I could barely afford, and my daughter still communicated only through drawings. 47 sketchbooks filled with pictures of Sarah doing things she'd never actually done, teaching Abby to ride a bike, baking cookies, reading bedtime stories. All the things Abby wished she could remember, drawn in careful pencil strokes. I was present in Abby's life, but I wasn't connected. I'd sit next to her while she drew, but I couldn't reach her. Every night I'd pour a shot of whiskey into the dirt outside, my ritual for Sarah, and whisper, "I'm trying. I don't know how, but I'm trying." Our house sat 18 miles from town, up in the Wind River Range at 8,200 feet. We'd bought it when Sarah was alive, when it felt like an adventure. Now it just felt isolated, cold, like a tomb we were living in. This was my life, paycheck to paycheck, silence at the dinner table, guilt that never slept, until the wolf came scratching. Until I opened that door and saw Keeper standing there, the same wolf I'd driven away 3 years ago, blaming him for being there when Sarah died. He'd come back, and he'd brought a warning. Keeper stood in the doorway, steam rising from his silver-gray coat. His amber eyes locked onto mine with an intensity I'd only seen once before, the night Sarah died. Blood matted the fur around his muzzle, dark against the snow. Not his blood, something else's. He looked at me. Then he turned his head sharply to the northeast, toward the deepest part of the mountains. Back to me. Northeast again. 3 times he repeated this, deliberate as a pointed finger. "What is it, boy?" The words felt strange in my mouth. I hadn't spoken to this wolf in 3 years, hadn't wanted to see him. After Sarah's accident, I'd fired shots over his head, screaming at him to leave, blaming him for distracting her that night, for being the reason she'd been out on that road in the first place. But Sarah's voice echoed in my memory. "When animals act strange, Nathan, listen. They know things we don't." I grabbed my gear with shaking hands. Heavy coat, rope, flare gun, first aid kit, emergency blanket. Supplies for a rescue I wasn't sure I'd survive. Outside, the temperature had to be -35, maybe worse with wind chill. The kind of cold that kills you in hours if you're not prepared. On the kitchen table, I scrawled a note. "Abby, following Keeper. If I'm not back by dawn, call Sheriff Wright. I love you. Dad." I checked her bedroom. She was sleeping, brown hair spilled across the pillow, one small hand clutching the stuffed wolf Sarah had given her years ago. My chest tightened. If something happened to me out there, she'd be alone, truly alone. But 7 days ago, Margaret Thornfield had gone missing. Our neighbor, 5 miles up the ridge, 78 years old, lived by herself, rarely came to town. When she didn't pick up her mail for 3 days, the postman called it in. We'd searched for 4 days straight, me, Deputy Wright, volunteers from town. Found nothing. Everyone assumed she'd wandered off in confusion or died quietly in her home. We'd checked her house twice. Empty. No signs of struggle, no body, nothing. Now Keeper was here, and I knew in my gut what that meant. The journey into the mountains was hell. Snow reached my knees, sometimes my thighs. Each step required pulling my entire leg up and plunging it down again. My lungs burned from breathing frozen air. Visibility was maybe 20 feet in the blowing snow. Keeper moved with purpose, stopping every 100 yards to make sure I was following. He'd wait, amber eyes glowing in my flashlight beam, then continue once I'd caught up. The wolf was 9 years old, ancient for his kind. His movements were slower than I remembered, his muzzle grayer, but his determination was absolute. 45 minutes in, my body was screaming. My face had gone numb. Ice crystals formed in my beard. I stopped, bent over, hands on my knees. I can't do this." Keeper doubled back. He pressed his body against my leg, warm and solid, and made a sound low in his throat. Not a growl. Something else. Almost like pleading. I looked down at him, this creature I'd blamed for 3 years. "Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head, studying me with those impossibly intelligent eyes. Then he did something I'll never forget. He limped 3 steps away. I noticed the limp for the first time, and looked back at me with what I can only describe as grief, as if he was carrying a burden so heavy it was crushing him. "You're not guiding me," I whispered, understanding flooding through me. "You're begging me." Something had happened out here, something Keeper couldn't fix alone, and somehow he knew I was the only one who could help. I forced myself upright, every muscle protesting. "All right, let's go." We'd been walking for maybe 10 more minutes when I heard it, a sound that stopped me cold, a howl, high-pitched, young, not Keeper's voice. My heart seized in my chest. I knew that pattern of howling. I'd heard it 100 times from Abby's room when she couldn't sleep and played recordings of wolves to calm herself. That was a juvenile wolf. Or I spun around, searching the darkness behind me. No, 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 no. In the beam of my flashlight, maybe 200 yards back, I saw a small figure in an oversized coat struggling through the snow, brown hair visible beneath the hood. Abby. My 8-year-old daughter had followed me into a blizzard, into negative 35-degree weather, into a death trap, and she'd been out here for nearly an hour. I ran. Terror gave me strength I didn't know I had left. Snow that had been impossible to walk through became something I plowed through like a machine. Abby! She looked up at the sound of my voice. Even from a distance I could see her shivering, her small body trembling with cold. When I reached her, I dropped to my knees and pulled her against me, feeling how soaked her legs were through her pants. What were you thinking? My voice came out harsher than I meant. Fear does that. You could die out here. You could... Abby pulled back and held up her sketchbook. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip it. In the beam of my flashlight I saw what she'd drawn. 4 circles connected by lines, one labeled Papa, one Abby, one Keeper, and one Old Woman. Below it, in her careful handwriting, Together. She'd known. Somehow, my 8-year-old daughter had known before I did that someone was out here, that we needed to find them, that we couldn't do it alone. I checked her quickly with the efficiency of my first aid training. Wet from the knees down, she must have broken through ice somewhere. Shivering violently, stage 1 hypothermia. Lips tinged blue, fingers clumsy. At this temperature, with wet clothes, she had maybe 2 hours before hypothermia became life-threatening. The impossible choice crashed down on me. I had 2 people who needed help now. Margaret Thornfield, somewhere in these mountains, probably dying, and my daughter, right here in front of me, definitely dying if I didn't get her to warmth. If I took Abby back, we'd never find Margaret in time. If I continued forward with Abby, the cold would kill her. If I stayed here, we'd all freeze. I looked at Keeper, desperate for an answer I knew a wolf couldn't give. He stared back at me, then turned to look northeast again, still urgent, still begging. That's when 3 more wolves emerged from the darkness. I pulled Abby behind me instinctively, reaching for the flare gun. But Keeper stepped between us and the newcomers, his posture relaxed. Not defensive. These weren't threats. The lead wolf was slightly smaller than Keeper, with a lighter gray coat. She approached slowly, carefully, and I realized with a shock that she was nursing, her belly still swollen from recent pups. Behind her came 2 younger wolves, maybe a year old, likely her offspring from a previous litter. The female, I'd later learned the biologist called her Luna, walked right past me to Abby. My daughter didn't flinch, didn't hide. She held out one small, trembling hand. Luna sniffed Abby's hand, then did something extraordinary. She lay down in the snow and looked at my daughter with an expression I'd never seen on a wild animal. Not aggression, not fear, invitation. Abby looked up at me, her eyes asking permission. "Abby, no, we can't." But she was already moving, slowly sitting down and leaning against Luna's side. The wolf didn't move, didn't react, just let this freezing child press against her warmth. The 2 younger wolves positioned themselves on either side of Abby, creating a living barrier against the wind. I watched, stunned, as my daughter's shivering began to ease. Wolf body temperature runs around 101 degrees, warmer than human. They were heating her like living furnaces. Keeper looked at me, then at Abby. then northeast again. The message was clear. The pack will protect your daughter. You need to come with me. Now. I can't leave her, I said, my voice breaking. I can't lose her too. Abby pulled her sketchbook out again. This time she drew quickly, her fingers still clumsy, but determined. She showed me a stick figure of me next to a stick figure lying down, an arrow pointing from me to the lying figure. Next to it, she drew herself surrounded by wolves, with a smile on her face. Below it, she'd written 2 words: Trust Keeper. Sarah's voice echoed in my memory again, from a conversation 3 years ago that I'd forgotten until this moment. We'd been watching Keeper from our window, debating whether to keep him or release him back to the wild. He's family now, Sarah had said, and family means trust, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. I looked at my daughter, surrounded by wolves in the middle of a blizzard, and she was safer than she'd been in my arms, because sometimes love means knowing when to let go. I knelt down, kissed Abby's forehead. I'll be back. I promise. She nodded. Then, for the first time in 3 years, my daughter spoke. Her voice was rusty, barely a whisper, but I heard it clearly over the wind. I know, Papa. The words hit me like a physical blow. My daughter had just spoken. After 3 years of silence, she'd spoken. Because of a wolf, because of trust, because of something I'd been too angry and grief-stricken to see. I stood up, tears freezing on my cheeks, and looked at Keeper. Show me. He turned and ran into the darkness. I followed, leaving my daughter behind, surrounded by a pack of wolves. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and it was the first truly good decision I'd made in 3 years. The landscape changed as Keeper led me deeper into the mountains. Rocky outcroppings pushed through the snow like broken teeth. I recognized where we were now, the northeast boundary of the Thornfield property. Margaret had inherited 40 acres from her late husband 15 years ago. Land she'd never developed, never sold, just left wild. Keeper stopped at what looked like a snowdrift against a rock face. He pawed at it frantically, whimpering in a way that made my chest hurt. Then I saw it, behind the drift, barely visible, a dark opening, a cave. I dropped to my hands and knees and crawled through. The entrance was tight, claustrophobic, my shoulders scraping rock on both sides. My coat snagged and I had to twist sideways to keep moving. For a terrifying moment I thought I'd get stuck, trapped in stone while people died on both sides of me. Then the passage opened up. I was in a cave maybe 12 feet across, the ceiling high enough to stand. Temperature was around 40 degrees. Cold, but survivable. Definitely warmer than outside. My flashlight beam swept the darkness and found 2 shapes against the far wall. The first was a wolf, old and gray-white, with a grizzled muzzle and clouded eyes. She lay pressed against something human-shaped, her body providing warmth. The second shape was Margaret Thornfield. Mrs. Thornfield. I rushed forward, my first aid training taking over. The old wolf, I'd later learned she was Luna's mother, the pack matriarch called Silver, watched me approach but didn't move, didn't threaten, just kept her body against Margaret's side. Margaret was in bad shape. Even in the dim light, I could see the swelling in her hip, the unnatural angle of her left leg. Fractured pelvis, probably. Her skin had a grayish tint, her breathing shallow and rapid. When I touched her forehead, the heat coming off her shocked me. Fever of at least 104. I did a quick assessment. Her left foot was black with frostbite. Red streaks climbed up her thigh from an infected wound. Sepsis. Severe dehydration evident from her cracked lips and sunken eyes. Scattered around the cave were empty protein bar wrappers, a water bottle, and a broken radio with its antenna snapped off. "Mrs. Thornfield, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Robert?" she whispered. "Robert, is that you?" "It's Nathan Cole, ma'am. I'm here to help." "Nathan." She tried to focus on my face. "Nathan Cole. My grandson." The words didn't make sense. I almost thought I'd misheard her. "What?" "Your father," she said, her voice barely audible. "Robert Cole. He was my son." My brain short-circuited. That's impossible. My father's mother abandoned him when he was 2. She died in 1995. Margaret's laugh was bitter, broken. "I didn't die. I let everyone think I did." She faded in and out as she told me, fragments of a story that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my family. She'd been 25 when she had my father, a heroin addict who'd turned to prostitution to feed her habit. Child Services took Robert when he was 2. Margaret disappeared, assumed dead, officially ruled so after 7 years. But she'd gotten clean at 28, 3 years sober, desperate to find her son. The foster system sealed the records. "You abandoned him," they told her. "You have no rights." She'd tracked Robert from a distance for 10 years. Watched him grow up in a good home with parents who actually loved him. Watched him become a teacher, get married, have a son of his own. Then Robert died of cancer at 35. Margaret arrived 1 week after the funeral. She'd found me, her grandson, married with a baby daughter, living here in Blackthorn Ridge. So 15 years ago, Margaret bought property 5 miles away. She'd been the anonymous benefactor leaving food at my door, money in the mailbox, mysteriously chopped firewood. "I had no right to your life," she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. "But I couldn't leave you alone. Not again. I couldn't let Robert's son grow up thinking nobody from his father's blood loved him." The anger came first, hot and sudden. "You've been here 15 years and never said anything? My father died thinking his mother didn't love him." "I know," she sobbed. "I know." Then grief hit. My father had grown up in foster care, always wondering about the mother who'd abandoned him. He'd died never knowing she'd gotten clean, never knowing she'd tried to find him, never knowing she'd loved him from the shadows. Finally came confusion. Why now? Why tell me now? Margaret's eyes met mine, and I saw the truth in them before she spoke. "Because I'm dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave me 2 months. That was 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. "Why didn't you get treatment?" "I did. For a while. Then I realized I was spending my last days in hospitals instead of—" She gestured weakly around the cave. "Instead of doing something that mattered." I looked around the cave with new eyes. Evidence of the wolves was everywhere. Paw prints in and out, tracked through snow. A dead rabbit near Margaret's hand, uneaten. Wolf fur matted around her body. In the corner, a pile of snow that had been melted. Drinking water. "How long have you been here?" 7 days, Margaret said. "I came to bring food to the wolves. Luna just had pups. She needed extra protein. I was trying to help them because—" Her voice broke. Because they helped you. 3 years ago, when Sarah died. My world tilted again. What? I saw it happen, Margaret whispered. I was on the ridge that night. I saw Sarah's car go off the road. I saw Keeper try to pull her out before the fire. I saw him stay there for 3 days until you came. I saw you blame him. She'd seen everything, and she'd kept silent the way she'd kept silent about everything. I slipped on ice carrying food up here, Margaret continued. Broke my hip, couldn't walk. The wolves. She looked at Silver, still pressed against her side. They stayed, kept me warm, brought me water. Keeper brought food, even though I couldn't eat most of it. They've been taking turns, never leaving me alone. I tried to process this. A pack of wild wolves had spent 7 days keeping an elderly woman alive, sacrificing their own hunting time, their own survival, to protect someone who'd tried to help them. Mrs. Thornfield. Maggie, she interrupted. Please, call me Maggie. Maggie, I need to get you out of here, but I can't move you. Your pelvis, if I try to lift you, I could kill you. She nodded weakly. I know. I'm a nurse. Was a nurse. Before the drugs. I pulled out my radio. No signal. Tried my cell phone. Nothing. We were too deep, too remote. The impossible choice stared me in the face again. If I stayed here, we'd both eventually freeze or starve. If I left to get help, Maggie might die before I got back. If I tried to move her, I'd almost certainly kill her. Go, Maggie said, reading my face. Go get help. I'll be fine. The wolves will stay until the end, I finished. But that's not good enough. I was trying to figure out what to do when I heard it. Faint at first, then growing stronger. A rhythmic sound that didn't belong in wilderness. Helicopter blades. I scrambled out of the cave, nearly getting stuck again in my haste. Outside I could see lights in the distance, sweeping across the mountains. I grabbed my flare gun and fired straight up. The red flare arced into the night sky, brilliant against the darkness. The helicopter turned toward us. I stood in the snow, shaking, and heard another sound, higher pitched, coming from the direction I'd left Abby. Luna's howl, long and urgent. Then Keeper's voice joined her. Then the 2 young wolves. They were calling to the pack, telling them something had changed. The helicopter landed 200 yards from the cave, the closest flat area. Sheriff Lucas Wright jumped out, followed by 2 paramedics and a woman I recognized as Dr. Rachel Freeman, a wildlife biologist from the university. Nathan! Lucas shouted over the rotor wash. Your daughter. She made it to my house 90 minutes ago. Relief nearly buckled my knees. She's alive? Hypothermia, but she'll be fine. She drew us a map, led us right here. Lucas looked at me with something like awe. That little girl saved Margaret Thornfield's life. No, I thought. The wolves saved her life. Abby just knew how to listen to them. The paramedics worked quickly. They stabilized Maggie's pelvis with a backboard, gave her morphine that barely touched her pain. Every movement made her scream. It took 20 agonizing minutes to extract her from the cave. I held her hand the entire time. You're going to meet your great-granddaughter properly, I told her. Abby, you're going to know her, so you stay with me. I'll try, Maggie whispered. As we loaded her into the helicopter, I saw them. 5 wolves on the ridge above us, Keeper, Luna, the 2 young wolves, and Silver, all watching. I raised my hand. A salute, an acknowledgement, a thank you I couldn't put into words. Keeper's howl split the night, long and mournful and beautiful. The pack joined him, their voices weaving together in harmony. Dr. Freeman stood next to me, tears streaming down her face. "I've studied wolves for 20 years," she said quietly. "I've never seen anything like this." "They're not just wolves," I said, watching them. "They're family." The helicopter lifted off. Through the window, I watched the 5 wolves until they disappeared into darkness. But I could still hear them howling, singing something ancient and true. Keeper had kept his promise. Whatever promise that was, whatever passed between him and Sarah 3 years ago, he'd kept it. He'd brought me to my grandmother. He'd protected my daughter. He'd shown me that love doesn't end with death. It just changes form. And sometimes it wears fur and has golden eyes. The hospital waiting room became my second home for the next 72 hours. Maggie was in surgery for 4 hours, pins in her pelvis, aggressive treatment for sepsis, IV antibiotics strong enough to make her delirious. The surgeon came out grim-faced. "She has a 60% survival rate," he told me. "The sepsis is advanced. Even if she survives that, Mr. Cole, she has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Her chart indicates she refused further treatment 6 weeks ago." "How long?" 2 to 6 months. "I'm sorry." Abby was 2 floors down, being treated for hypothermia and mild frostbite. When I finally got to her room, she was sitting up in bed, wrapped in heated blankets. Her hair was still damp from the warming bath they'd given her. She saw me and held out her arms. I crossed the room in 3 steps and held her like I should have been holding her for 3 years. She felt so small, so fragile, so impossibly brave. "You spoke," I whispered into her hair. "You actually spoke." She pulled back and looked at me with Sarah's green eyes. Then she shook her head and pointed to her throat. The doctors had warned me this might happen. The temporary break in her selective mutism might not last. Trauma doesn't heal in straight lines, but she'd spoken when it mattered. She'd found her voice in the moment her father needed to hear it most. That had to count for something. The hospital social worker came by that evening. A woman named Patricia with kind eyes and a clipboard that meant trouble. "Mr. Cole, I need to talk to you about the financial implications of Mrs. Thornfield's care." I knew what was coming. "How much?" "The surgery, ICU stay, antibiotics, upcoming treatments. We're looking at approximately $145,000. Mrs. Thornfield has Medicare, which will cover 68%. That leaves approximately $47,000. "And she has?" Patricia checked her notes. "According to her file, she receives $1,200 a month in Social Security. No savings, no assets, except the 40 acres of undeveloped land, which wouldn't sell for more than $28,000 even if she wanted to." I did the math in my head. I was already $43,000 in debt from Sarah's medical bills. My salary was $52,000 a year before taxes. After mortgage, utilities, food, Abby's therapy, my car payment, insurance, I had maybe $50 left each month, sometimes less. "I'll figure it out," I said. "Payment plan. Something." Patricia's expression told me she'd heard this before. "Mr. Cole, at your current income, a payment plan for $90,000 would take approximately 35 years. Then I'll work for 35 years. The next morning, I was in Maggie's ICU room when Pastor John Mills from the community church showed up. He was a big man, barrel-chested, with white hair and hands that had done real work. "Nathan," he said, pulling up a chair, "the town wants to help. Pastor, I appreciate it, but someone started a GoFundMe last night. Help Nathan Cole's family. Girl saved by wolves. It's already raised $25,000. I stared at him. "What? Who started it?" "Anonymous donor. But it's being shared all over social media. Local news picked up the story. CBS out of Denver ran a segment this morning. He pulled out his phone and showed me. There was Abby's face on screen. The headline read, 8-year-old girl saved by wolf pack in Wyoming blizzard. I don't want charity, I said. This isn't charity, son. This is community. This is people recognizing that something miraculous happened on that mountain, and they want to be part of it. By the time Maggie woke up fully on day 3, the GoFundMe had reached $63,000. Donors from all 50 states. People who'd never heard of Blackthorn Ridge but had heard about a little girl who couldn't speak, wolves who chose compassion over instinct, and a grandmother who'd loved from the shadows for 15 years. I was sitting next to Maggie's bed when she opened her eyes. Really opened them, not the morphine-hazed confusion of the past few days. "Nathan," she said, her voice clearer than I'd heard it. "Your daughter. Is she—" "She's fine. 2 floors down. She wants to meet you." Tears spilled down Maggie's weathered cheeks. "I'd like that." I brought Abby up that afternoon. She was in a wheelchair, hospital policy, clutching her sketchbook. When we got to Maggie's room, Abby climbed out of the chair and walked slowly to the bed. Maggie watched her approach, drinking in every detail. "You look like Sarah," she whispered. "Robert's daughter-in-law. She was beautiful." Abby opened her sketchbook and showed Maggie a drawing she'd made that morning. An old woman and a little girl holding hands, hearts floating between them. Underneath, in careful letters, "Grandma Maggie." Maggie's sob was raw and broken. "You want to call me Grandma?" Abby nodded solemnly, then carefully climbed onto the hospital bed. She curled up next to Maggie, mindful of the IV lines and monitors, and laid her head on Maggie's shoulder. "I've been called many things," Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion. "Addict, prostitute, abandoned mother, dead woman, but I've never been called Grandma." She stroked Abby's hair with trembling fingers. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me this." That evening, Pastor John called an emergency town meeting. 400 people showed up, more than I'd ever seen at any community gathering. The pastor stood at the podium in the community center. "We have $63,000 raised. That's $13,000 more than our goal. The question before us tonight is, what do we do with the excess?" A rancher named Tom Bradley stood up. Big man, weather-beaten face, had lost $15,000 worth of cattle to wolves 2 years ago. "Give $28,000 to buy Margaret Thornfield's 40 acres. Make it a wolf sanctuary. Permanent protection." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Nathan Cole's family saved one of our own," Tom continued. "But they did it with help from wolves. Wolves that most of us wanted dead last year. Maybe we owe them protection too." Another hand went up. A woman named Diane Porter, I vaguely recognized from the grocery store. $10,000 to Nathan Cole for his debt relief. The man's been drowning for 3 years, and we all knew it, and we did nothing. $10,000 to Abby's college fund, someone else called out. "That little girl is going to do great things. Let's make sure she can." $5,000 to wolf conservation research, Dr. Fair. Rachel Freeman suggested, "to study this behavior, to understand it." The votes came fast. Within 20 minutes, the community had decided how every penny would be spent. I sat in the back, overwhelmed, trying not to cry in front of 400 of my neighbors. Pastor John found me afterward. "Still think it's charity?" I think I struggled for words. I think I forgot what community means. We all forget sometimes, he said gently. That's why we have to keep reminding each other. On day 6, everything changed. I was sitting with Maggie, reading her updates from the GoFundMe messages, people from across the country sending prayers and well wishes, when a man in a Wyoming game and fish uniform walked into the room. He was maybe 45, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much. His name tag read, G. Stone. Mr. Cole, I'm Garrett Stone, Wildlife Management Officer. I need to talk to you about the wolves. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. What about them? They're habituated to humans. That makes them a danger under Wyoming law. I have authority to issue an euthanization order. The room went silent. Even Maggie, weak as she was, tried to sit up straighter. Those wolves saved 3 lives, I said carefully. I understand that, but the law is clear. Wild animals that become comfortable with humans are unpredictable. Today, they save. Tomorrow, they might kill. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched. This wasn't easy for him. I have 48 hours to assess the situation. If they meet the criteria, I'm legally obligated to put them down. You can't. My son was killed by wolves 8 years ago, Garrett said quietly. Tyler. He was 6 years old. The air left the room. Maggie's hand found mine and squeezed. I'm sorry, I managed. I didn't know. His school took him camping in Shoshone Forest. He wandered from the group. We found him 3 hours later. Garrett's voice was steady, but I could hear the cracks underneath. The wolves didn't leave much, just enough for me to identify him by his jacket. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo, a little boy with bright red hair and missing front teeth, grinning at the camera. I've dedicated my life to making sure no other parent goes through what I did, Garrett continued. Your wolves? They entered a human structure. They had prolonged contact with humans, including a child. Under Wyoming Statute 23-1304, that's grounds for immediate removal. Removal meaning euthanization, I'm sorry. But I've seen what happens when we make exceptions. I've buried my son because someone made an exception. He left, his footsteps echoing down the hospital corridor. Maggie was crying silently. This is my fault. I brought them food. I made them comfortable with humans. No, I said firmly. You saved their pups. They saved you. That's not habituation. That's reciprocity. But I didn't know if the law cared about the difference. The emergency town meeting was held 2 days later. 400 people packed into the community center again. But this time the mood was different, divided. Garrett Stone stood at the podium with photographs. Tyler's death scene, medical examiner's report, 14 other cases in Wyoming of friendly wolves that had turned aggressive. I know you all want to save these wolves, he said. I understand the emotional appeal, but emotion doesn't change biology. Wolves are apex predators. They're not dogs, they're not pets. And when they lose their fear of humans, people die. He showed the photo of Tyler again. This is what wolves do. My son trusted them. He loved animals, and they tore him apart. Half the room was in tears. The other half was nodding. A young mother stood up, holding a 5-year-old girl's hand. I voted to save the wolves last week. I'm changing my vote. My daughter's life is worth more than a feel-good story. Someone else. But these wolves are different. They saved people. Garrett's response was measured, devastating. The camp counselor said the same thing about the wolves near Tyler's campsite. He'd been feeding them for months, said they were different, until they weren't. Pastor John tried to moderate. Perhaps there's a compromise, GPS collars, relocation to a remote area. Relocation has a 90% failure rate, Garrett countered. They either return to the original territory or die trying. As for collars, how do we guarantee they won't approach humans again? How do we guarantee your daughter, he pointed to the young mother, won't be the next Tyler Stone? The vote was called. Should Blackthorn Ridge request an exception to the euthanization law? The results: 55% yes, 45% no. Not unanimous, not even close. The community was torn apart, and I couldn't blame the people who voted no. They weren't wrong. They were scared. And fear is just love with nowhere to go. After the meeting, the young mother who'd voted no approached me. She was crying. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole. I know I seem heartless, but I can't risk my daughter." Before I could respond, Abby climbed down from her chair. She walked to the woman and held up her sketchbook. She'd drawn a picture of the woman's daughter playing safely in a yard, while, in the far background, wolves watched from the woods. Under it, Abby had written, "Being scared means you love her. That's okay." The woman broke down, sobbing. Abby hugged her legs, and the woman picked her up, holding my daughter while she cried. That night I brought Maggie home. Not to her empty house, but to ours. We converted the living room into a bedroom. Hospice nurses came twice a day. Abby refused to leave her side. Maggie was fading. The cancer was moving faster than anyone expected. The doctor gave her 2 weeks, maybe 3. On day 8, when Abby was asleep on the couch next to Maggie's hospital bed, Maggie whispered to me, "I need to tell you something about why I was in that cave. You were bringing food to the wolves." "No, Nathan, I went there to die." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Luna had 4 pups," Maggie continued. "They were weak. She needed more food than Keeper could provide alone. I'd been bringing her rabbits for weeks. That day I brought everything I had left. I was going to help them one last time, then—" She gestured vaguely. The cancer was getting bad. I had maybe a month of real consciousness left. I didn't want to die in a hospital bed, confused and medicated. I wanted to die doing something that mattered. "You tried to kill yourself for wolves?" "I tried to die for family," she corrected gently. "There's a difference. The wolves saved you. I wanted to save them back. Then I slipped on the ice, broke my hip, and they saved me instead." She laughed weakly. "Ironic, isn't it?" "Maggie, I don't regret it," she said firmly. "I got 10 more days, 10 days of being grandma. I got to meet Abby. I got to know you. That's 10 days more than I deserved." I held her hand and didn't know what to say. On day 9, Garrett Stone came back. But this time, he looked different, shaken. He carried a manila folder marked "Case Reopened" in red letters. "Nathan, I need to talk to you. About Tyler." I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me so Maggie and Abby wouldn't hear. "What about him?" "I was wrong." His voice cracked on the words. "I've been wrong for 8 years. He opened the folder with trembling hands and showed me a DNA analysis report dated just 3 days ago. "I hired a private investigator to look into your wolves, to build my case for euthanization. Instead, he found something about Tyler's death." Garrett's finger traced down the page to highlighted text. "The wolves that killed my son weren't wolves. Not fully. DNA analysis shows 50% gray wolf, 50% Alaskan Malamute. Wolf-dog hybrids. I don't understand." They were illegal pets, bred and owned by Marcus Webb, Tyler's camp counselor. Garrett's hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the folder. Webb bred hybrids and sold them online for $3,000 each. When they became too aggressive, he'd release them into Shoshone Forest. 2 weeks before Tyler died, Webb released 5 of them. Jesus Christ. The sheriff at the time was Webb's cousin. He covered it up, ruled it a wild wolf attack to protect Webb. Garrett looked at me with eyes full of 8 years of misdirected grief. I spent 8 years hating the wrong species, Nathan. Tyler died because a man was greedy and irresponsible, not because wolves are killers. Why are you telling me this? Because I almost made the same mistake twice. He closed the folder. I was going to kill your wolves tomorrow. I had the paperwork ready, but they're not habituated in the way I thought. They're not pets gone wrong. They're wild animals that made a choice. There's a difference. What are you going to do? I'm dropping the euthanization order, and I'm pressing charges against Marcus Webb for manslaughter, illegal breeding, and falsifying evidence. Garrett's voice hardened. He killed my son. Not wolves. Not your family's wolves. Him. Does this mean? It means Keeper lives. His pack lives. But Nathan. Garrett met my eyes. Can I meet them? I need to apologize. Even if they don't understand. I need to do it. The next morning we drove to the sanctuary land, the 40 acres the town had purchased. Dr. Rachel Freeman met us there with tracking equipment. She'd located the pack's current den site. We approached slowly. Garrett, me, Abby, and Rachel. The wolves were there. Keeper, Luna, 4 pups about 7 months old now, 2 yearlings, and old Silver. 9 wolves watching us from 50 yards away. Keeper stood at the front, ears forward, assessing the threat. Garrett stopped walking. He knelt in the snow. And then he did something I'll never forget. He pulled out the photo of Tyler and held it up so the wolves could see. I blamed you, he said, his voice breaking. For 8 years, I blamed creatures that had nothing to do with my son's death. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Keeper tilted his head, studying Garrett with those intelligent amber eyes. Then slowly, carefully, he walked forward. Luna made a sound of warning, but Keeper ignored her. He stopped 3 feet from Garrett, close enough that Garrett could reach out and touch him. They stared at each other. Man and wolf, both carrying grief, both scarred by violence they didn't choose. Then Keeper sat down, not aggressive, not submissive, just present. Garrett sobbed, great racking sobs that shook his whole body. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for not being what I thought you were. Thank you for proving me wrong. Keeper didn't move until Garrett had cried himself empty. Then the wolf stood, turned, and walked back to his pack. But something had shifted. Some weight had been lifted from both of them. That evening, while Abby was drawing next to Maggie's bed, I finally did what I'd been avoiding for 3 years. I found Sarah's journal in the box of her things I'd never unpacked. The handwriting I knew as well as my own. The loops and curves of her letters, the way she dotted her eyes with little circles when she was happy. I opened it to the first entry, dated 3.5 years ago. I found a lump today. I'm terrified. But I'll fight this. For Nathan, for Abby. The next entry, 2 months later. Stage 3 breast cancer. Aggressive treatment recommended. But I asked what that means. Chemo. Radiation. Losing my hair. Watching myself fade while Abby watches me fade. 6 months of horror versus 6 months of life. I'm choosing life. I kept reading, my hands shaking. I've decided not to tell Nathan about refusing treatment. He'll want to fight. He'll want to save me. But some things can't be saved, only ended with grace. Ended with, I have maybe 4 months of good time left. I want Abby to remember me healthy, laughing, present, not dying. The final entry was dated the day before she died. Tomorrow I'm releasing Keeper back into the wild. But I'm also planning to end this my way. There's a cliff on Route 287. If I accelerate, it'll look like an accident. Nathan will blame himself for letting me go alone, but that's better than watching me die slowly. That's better than Abby's last memory being me in hospice, skeleton thin, barely conscious. I know this sounds crazy, but I talked to Keeper tonight. I asked him to protect Nathan and Abby after I'm gone. He looked at me with those eyes, and I swear he understood. Maybe that's the morphine talking. Maybe I'm just a dying woman finding meaning where there isn't any. But I choose to believe. I choose to think love transcends species, that promises can be kept even after death. Nathan, if you ever read this, I didn't abandon you. I protected you. I loved you both too much to let you watch me suffer. Don't blame yourself. This was my choice, my gift. Live. Please live. Not just exist. Live. Attached to the journal was a police report I'd never read. Accident reconstruction. Vehicle accelerated before impact. No brake marks. Witness statement. I saw the car. It didn't try to stop. Investigator's note. Wolf tracks circling crash site. Blood evidence suggests Wolf attempted to pull victim from vehicle. Wolf remained at scene for approximately 72 hours. Sarah had chosen to die, and Keeper had tried to save her anyway. For 3 years I'd blamed the wolf for being there, when all along he'd been trying to stop her, and failing, and staying with her body until I arrived, and keeping a promise to protect us that I hadn't even known existed. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, clutching Sarah's journal, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. Abby found me there. She didn't say anything, just climbed into my lap, 8 years old and wiser than I'd ever been, and held me while I broke apart. When I could finally speak, I whispered, "Your mama didn't leave us. She tried to protect us." Abby nodded against my chest. She'd known. Somehow she'd always known. She told Keeper to keep us safe, I continued, and he did. For 3 years, even when I hated him, he kept his promise. Abby pulled back and looked at me with Sarah's green eyes. She opened her mouth, struggled for a moment, then spoke in that rusty, barely used voice. "Mama's still keeping us safe, too. Through Keeper, through Grandma Maggie, through everything." I held my daughter and realized she was right. Love doesn't end. It just changes form. Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes it's a journal entry. Sometimes it's a wolf with golden eyes who refuses to give up. Maggie died on day 10, just as the sun was rising. Abby was curled up next to her on the hospital bed we'd set up in our living room. I was holding Maggie's hand. The hospice nurse had warned us the night before, "It's time. Say your goodbyes." Her last words were for Abby. "Sweet girl, you saved me. Not just from the cave, from 45 years of loneliness. Promise me something. Don't wait 45 years to say, 'I love you.' Say it now. Always now." Abby struggled with the words, her voice catching, then finally, "I love you, Grandma Maggie." Maggie smiled, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I love you too, baby. I love you all so much." She closed her eyes at 6:47 a.m. and didn't open them again. Outside, the wolves howled. All 9 of them, Keeper, Luna, the 4 pups, 2 yearlings, Old Silver. Their voices rose in harmony, mournful and beautiful, singing grief into the morning air. The entire town heard it. People stopped on their way to work, stood in their yards, listened to 9 wolves mourning a woman who'd tried to feed them. Pastor John later told me that phones started ringing all over Blackthorn Ridge. "Did you hear that? The wolves are singing for Margaret." We buried Maggie 3 days later in the town cemetery on a hill overlooking the 40-acre sanctuary. 300 people came, more than I expected for a woman most of them barely knew. But her story had spread. The anonymous benefactor revealed the grandmother who loved from shadows, the woman who chose to die with purpose rather than fade away in confusion. Pastor John spoke first. Margaret Thornfield lived 2 lives. The first 23 years, she was lost. The last 45, she was searching. In the final 10 days, she was found. Then it was my turn. I stood at the podium, hands shaking, holding Maggie's journal. I knew this woman for 10 days, but she knew me for 15 years. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and continued. I thought I was alone after Sarah died. I wasn't. Maggie was there, in the shadows, leaving food on my porch, money in my mailbox, firewood mysteriously chopped, loving us from a distance because she thought she didn't deserve to love us up close. I opened the journal to the final entry, written the day before she went into the mountains. She wrote, "Tomorrow I go to the wolves, to Robert's wolves now, through his son. If I die there, I die with purpose. If I live, maybe Nathan will let me be grandma. Either way, I win." I had to stop. Tears were blurring the words. She won. She got to be grandma. For 10 days, she got to be the person she'd spent 45 years trying to become. And we got to be her family. The crowd was silent except for the sound of people crying. "She taught me something important," I continued. "It's never too late to matter. Never too late to say I love you. Never too late to be family." She spent 45 years believing she didn't deserve forgiveness, but the moment we gave it to her, she became whole. As they lowered Maggie's coffin into the ground, the wolves howled again. Every person at the funeral heard it, that wild, ancient sound of loss and love tangled together. Garrett Stone, standing near the back, whispered to me afterward, "She's not alone. They're singing her home." 6 months passed. Summer came to Wyoming, melting the snow and revealing the land underneath. The Keeper's Promise Wildlife Sanctuary held its grand opening on a brilliant July day. The 40 acres had been transformed, an observation deck where people could watch the wolves from a safe distance, an education center with photos and information about wolf behavior, biology, and conservation, GPS tracking equipment donated by the state, and at the center of it all, 3 graves. Sarah's, Maggie's, and a symbolic marker for all the wolves who'd been killed by misunderstanding and fear. I stood at the podium as co-director, alongside Dr. Rachel Freeman. 400 people attended, reporters, wildlife officials, families with children, and every resident of Blackthorn Ridge who could make it. 6 months ago, I began. My family was broken. My daughter couldn't speak. I couldn't feel. My grandmother, who I didn't even know I had, was dying alone in a cave. A wolf changed all of that. One wolf who remembered a promise made by a dying woman. I looked at Abby, standing near the front with a group of children. She was running the kids' art program now, teaching them to draw wildlife. She smiled at me, and I saw Sarah in that smile. This sanctuary isn't just about wolves, I continued. It's about honoring the bonds that transcend species. It's about remembering that love doesn't need words. It needs presence. It needs showing up every single day. Garrett Stone spoke next, his voice steady now. I spent 8 years hating wolves for something they didn't do. This sanctuary taught me that hate is easy. Understanding is hard. But understanding heals. He paused, looking out at the crowd. Marcus Webb, the man actually responsible for my son's death, was convicted last month of manslaughter and illegal animal breeding. 15 years in prison. That's justice. Finally, the crowd applauded. Then Abby surprised everyone. She walked up to the podium, my 9-year-old daughter who'd barely spoken in 3 years, and adjusted the microphone down to her height. "My name is Abigail Cole," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I haven't talked much for a long time because I didn't think words mattered. Then Keeper showed me that the best things are said without words at all." She held up her published book, Keeper's Promise, illustrated with her own drawings. It had sold 15,000 copies, all proceeds going to wolf conservation. This sanctuary is named after Keeper because he kept his promise to my mama. But it's really for all of us, to remind us that family is a choice. Blood makes you related, but love makes you family. Keeper isn't related to us, but he's family. Grandma Maggie wasn't related to us, but she was family. Family is choosing to show up, to stay, to love, even when it's hard. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. I watched my daughter speaking, thriving, teaching, and felt Sarah's presence so strongly it made my chest ache. After the ceremony, I walked up to the sanctuary ridge where Keeper usually rested. He was there, 9.5 years old now, his muzzle nearly white with age. Luna lay beside him. The 4 pups, now full-grown wolves named Hope, Promise, Grace, and Love, played nearby with their own pups. The pack had grown to 11 wolves. I sat down next to Keeper. He didn't startle, just opened one amber eye and looked at me. "You did it," I said quietly. "You kept your promise. Abby's happy. I'm happy. We're okay now. You can rest." Keeper's tail thumped once against the ground. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo. Rachel Freeman and me at dinner last week. We'd been dating for 2 months. She was kind, patient, and she understood that she wasn't replacing Sarah. She was adding to her legacy. "Sarah would like her," I told Keeper. "Rachel doesn't pretend, just like you." 2 years later, I stood on the same ridge on Abby's 11th birthday. Rachel was with me now, my wife of 6 months. Abby's children's book had become a regional bestseller. She spoke at schools about selective mutism, grief, and healing. Straight A student. Happy kid. Nothing like the silent, traumatized 8-year-old she'd been. The pack had grown to 16 wolves, Keeper's descendants, his legacy spreading through the mountains. But Keeper himself was failing. At 11 years old, ancient for a wild wolf, he spent most of his time near the sanctuary center. Arthritis had settled in his back legs. Luna brought him food. He rarely moved. That evening, Abby insisted we visit him before her birthday cake. "I need to see Keeper first." We found him under Sarah's tree, the oak we'd planted in her memory. He was lying down, breathing labored. Luna hadn't left his side in 2 days. Dr. Rachel examined him gently. "It's time," she said softly. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but soon. I sat down next to him. "Hey, old friend." His tail moved weakly, recognition in those clouded eyes. "You did it. You kept your promise for 11 years. We're okay now. You can rest." Abby lay down on Keeper's other side, opposite Luna. She pulled out her sketchbook and showed him the final drawing. Sarah in the center, surrounded by Nathan, Abby, Maggie, Keeper, Luna, the pups, Rachel, all connected by red lines. At the bottom, family, forever. Thank you, Keeper. "I'm putting Mama in the middle," Abby said, crying now, "because she brought us all together. You kept your promise to her. Now I promise you, we'll take care of Luna and your pups and their pups. Your family will never be alone." Keeper looked at her for a long moment. Then he licked her face one last time, looked at me one last time, looked at Luna, who nuzzled him gently. He took a deep breath and released it slowly, and was gone. Luna's howl split the evening air, long and mournful and beautiful. The other wolves joined, all 16 of them. The sound carried across the valley, and the town bells rang 14 times, one for each year. We buried Keeper next to Maggie's grave. The headstone read, "Keeper 2015 to 2029. He kept his promise. Beloved friend, protector, teacher, love given is love returned." At the burial, I said, "Sarah sent you to us, or you sent yourself, I don't know which, but you saved us, not just from the storm, from ourselves. You taught me that family isn't blood, it's choice, it's loyalty, it's showing up every single day. Thank you for showing up. For 11 years you showed up." Abby placed her drawing on the grave. "Mama was right. You're family. You'll always be family. And when I'm old, I'll tell my kids about you. I'll tell them, once a wolf kept a promise and changed everything." As we stood there, me, Abby, Rachel, the sun set over Wyoming mountains. 16 wolves stood on the ridge behind us, silhouetted against the orange sky. Promise, Keeper's son, and now the pack's alpha, howled. It sounded just like his father. I smiled through my tears. The promise continues. Because love doesn't end with death. It just changes form. Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes it's a journal. Sometimes it's a wolf with golden eyes. And sometimes it's a legacy that runs through bloodlines, wild and free, protecting a family it chose across generations. Keeper had kept his promise. And now, so would we. The end. Sometimes the hardest truth we face isn't death. It's realizing we've spent years believing we don't deserve love. Margaret lived 45 years in the shadows, convinced her past mistakes made her unworthy of family. She watched from a distance, loved anonymously, and prepared to die alone. But in her final 10 days, she discovered what so many of us forget. It's never too late to matter. Never too late to be called Grandma. Never too late to hear "I love you" and believe it's meant for you. This story reminds us that the mistakes we made decades ago don't define who we are today. That isolation is a choice we can unmake. That showing up, even late, even scared, even certain we'll be rejected, is always worth it. Keeper didn't just keep a promise to Sarah. He showed us that loyalty transcends time, that love doesn't require perfection, and that family is built by those who choose to stay. If you've been waiting for permission to reach out to someone you've lost touch with, this is it. If you've been hiding because you think your past disqualifies you from love, you're wrong. What relationship have you been too afraid to repair? And what would you say if you knew they'd forgive you? Share your story below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.